weeks, we were able to get a Bible order in. And if you want to know what $4,000 worth of Bibles looks like, there it is. So each of those cases has 500 Bibles that'll be heading up to the interior, Lord willing, about a week and a half from now, as we've got plans to travel to Kinshasa Tuesday, Wednesday of next week. So about a week from now, should be getting close to landing in Kinshasa. Unfortunately, plans changed in Noah's work situation, and they're not going to let him go. So a little disappointing, but we know that God's in all things. And so the team there's disappointed as well. They were looking forward to having him back. But the Bibles are ordered. We've got an order in for our printed syllabuses. Those are at the printing copy place now. So when I get there, we'll pick those up. And then we'll have a few legal fees along the way that we'll share in updates as we're traveling up into the interior about probably 2.5 weeks from now. So thank you all for all of your support for the ministry, for the love offerings that have come in towards that project. We have not been able to get Bibles in this quantity in Congo for, I would guess, 8 years, since we've been able to order cases of Bibles like this. So the churches have been out of stock for a long time. We have students that have been studying at the Bible Institute borrowing Bibles because they haven't had enough to get their own. So this is a big answer to prayer, and thank you for helping us get those ordered. Tonight, we are going to continue our study on why dispensationalism matters. And if the technology works, this will be our last slideshow, PowerPoint of this lesson book. If you have your books tonight, we are in the final lesson. We are on page 123 of your book. And the title tonight is The Second Coming of Christ. And as we're talking tonight about the second coming of Christ, I don't know, Caleb, if you can reach around and get me turned on too, that would be a big help. We've already talked about the tribulation period. We talked about what it is. We talked about some purposes for it. And we talked about that it will make an end to wickedness and to the wicked one. And so as we look at some of those things, which will be right back up with you shortly, we are now coming into this topic of the second coming of Christ. So following the rapture of the church, that snatching up, that taking away of the believers to be with the Lord, this great tribulation being poured out upon the earth over a 7-year period, this tribulation period ends, as the book says here on this first paragraph, of all prophecy might be considered the second coming of Christ. Jesus said in Matthew 25:31, "The Son of Man shall come in his glory, and all the holy angels with him. Then he shall sit on the throne of his glory." The writer of this study goes on to say many Christians have a mental image of the second coming. And I want to stop there. A mental image of the second coming. And I think when he says many Christians do, I would think that all Christians do. Have some sort of a mental picture of what this second coming looks like. So I just want to grab some of those ideas. When you think of the second coming of Christ, what things come to your mind? What do you see in your mind with the second coming? Okay. Yeah, this white, glorious shining coming kind of down from heaven to the earth. Good. Yes, the feet landing on the Mount of Olives. I mean, boom, his feet just hitting. Mike. Yes, establishing this earthly kingdom. So, like him sitting on this throne and having this power in a political kind of a mentality of establishing a kingdom. Good. The geographic changes. Yep. Yeah. When we read the prophecies, there's some major geographical shifts going on. Yeah. What God looks like, seeing the glory of the Lord, the battle hymn of the Republic, you know? Yeah. Hi, buddy. You going up or down? It doesn't matter to me. Pick your direction. All right. I don't see that really in the second coming. Kind of the opposite of that. Yeah, a little faster. Good. Yeah, we think of this kind of, I like that. It's like when we think of the second coming, it's like boom, like a thunderbolt going off. Yeah. Lightning bolt, thunder crack, something like that. Good. What else?
And just that mentioning, it's going to be loud.
Yeah.
The earth is splitting there, and I mean, I would think.
Yep. Yeah.
It's not really pictured, but that's.
But it is in our mind. It's in that kind of, if you're thinking of it in terms of a movie with the sound effects, yeah, it's a big, bold thing. Bye. So, this idea that the second coming has this idea of a single monetary event, like this instantaneous return of the Lord, is kind of in our mind. But the author does a good job pointing out that the scriptures actually speak of the second coming as a sequence of events occurring over a period of several days. And in fact, when we look at Daniel's prophecy, there's a 75-day interval between when Christ returns and when he establishes the kingdom. And so we generally, in our mind, we put this thing together as like, boom, he's here and the kingdom is inaugurated. But there is a sequence of events that builds and leads up to the establishment of the kingdom. And so within this second coming, and if we're talking in terms of Greek, remember I spent a week going through rapture, harpazo. When we're talking about the second coming, we're not talking about harpazo, that's snatching up. But the second coming, this return, we would translate that in Latin to be Advent. Have you guys ever heard of Advent? When do we usually talk about Advent? At Christmas. We have our Advent calendars. The coming of the Lord calendar. And we're talking about, in that Advent, his first coming. The advent of the Lord, the virgin birth, him coming as a babe, a helpless babe. And we think of that first coming of his humility as a lamb being led unto the slaughter. But that same word, Advent, in Greek is parousia. Parousia. And the parousia is that second coming, that coming of the Lord. And so the parousia, when we're looking at it, there are going to be 7 events that build up to this great ending of the establishment of the kingdom. So we'll flip back through these maybe here quickly, back to where we were. All right, so the second coming of Christ first, the first event that's going to lead up to this moment when Christ returns is the campaign of Armageddon. Now, we often call it the Battle of Armageddon. And I understand why. It has this war connotation to it. But if we understand what actually is going to happen at Armageddon, how much battling actually occurs? It's sort of one-sided, yeah. There is a prophecy in Zechariah that it indicates that the Gentiles are going to establish this army against Jerusalem, and they're going to begin to penetrate the walls. And as they begin to penetrate the walls, Israel's going to repent and cry out to the Lord. And in that moment, Christ will return. And then we have all that Revelation stuff where he opens his mouth and the sword goes out. The blood is so deep. You know, we've got all of that going on. But they're really, in the sense of, if we're talking warfare, there's really not a lot of battling. It's more of a campaign. And I think the terminology of a campaign of Armageddon probably gives us a better picture of what's happening. Let's look at a couple of these things, because it's not really a single battle, but it's more of a gathering with an intention that's going to get wiped out very, very briskly. Where we get the word Armageddon, one of the places, is from Revelation 16:16. Could I get a volunteer to read Revelation 16:16? Hey, you want to just come over here and be free? You're kind of undecided today. Okay. Somebody got that one? Thank you, Gary. If you'd read Revelation 16:16, and then let's just go to Revelation 16, because our next section we're going to look at the context of that. There you go. Now, Armageddon sounds like really apocalyptic because we only use it in our language for the apocalypse, for the end, this kind of prophecy that's yet to come. But the word Armageddon as a Hebrew word isn't really all that spectacular. The word for a mountain or a hill in Hebrew, we would pronounce it H-A-R. It would just kind of be like a pirate. Har! Har-Mageddon. And then Megiddo is the name of the hill. So it really is just the mountain of Megiddo. That's what Armageddon means. But in Hebrew, it is pronounced, as we bring it into English, we would say Armageddon. And so the mountain of Megiddo, or Armageddon, is the name of the location. It's not an event. Armageddon's not an event. It's a place. You can go to the mountain of Megiddo if you take a tour of the Holy Lands today. Some of you have been. Pastor Cleve went years ago. I don't know if you got to go to Megiddo, kind of see. Yeah, from a distance. But, many people have been there. You can go and you can visit the site and you can stand there on the hill of Megiddo. And so it's really a location, but the reason that we think of it in such apocalyptic terms is because of what's been spoken about what is going to take place there. And for that, we're going to back up to verse 13. So Revelation 16:13 down through 16, if somebody could read that whole section for me. 16:13 to 16. Volunteer? In verse 16, we read already, they gathered them, and the place was called Armageddon. And so what we have happening here in this prophecy is that these three unclean spirits, like frogs, came out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the prophet. And when we look at our question here on page 124 of your book, it asks, question number 9, who will take part in motivating the kings of the earth to gather Israel into battle? Who is it that's going to go out and persuade all of the kings of earth to come do battle against Israel? It's these spirits that came from the dragon, which is Satan, from the beast, and from this prophet, this false prophet. These evil spirits, and we would call them demons. These demonic influences are going to go out, and they're going to get the world to send its troops to this place. Now, you have to remember a few things. As this is transpiring, is the earth in a healthy place at this time? No. They've experienced pestilence and disease and water turning bitter, vegetation being consumed by fire, droughts. All of this has happened to the earth. The earth is not really in a healthy place, and yet somehow they're still communicating and they're still organizing. Despite all the destruction and devastation, they still are able to organize and communicate. And so they're going to mobilize a world army to go to this location, to assemble at the mountain of Megiddo. Do you think that's going to happen in a day? Now, we can mobilize things pretty quick. Troops can move pretty fast in the world in which we live. I'm going to presume at this time, if technology continues to advance, it will be even faster. Even with some of the destruction and devastation, they're going to be able to move troops, but it's going to take some time. So this is going to unfold. These spirits are going to go out, persuade kings. Kings are going to send their troops from around the world to gather at this location to do battle against Israel. They're going to build a force to try to invade and destroy Jerusalem. Now, then as we go on, we're going to see that this earliest reference to this campaign, it goes actually back to the Psalms. If I could get one person to go back and read Psalm chapter 2, verse 1. Psalm chapter 2, verse 1. Who will take that one? I got a couple verses here. Psalm 2:1. Dad, you've got that one. Then we need a prophecy of Zechariah chapter 12. Walker, you've got that one, and it's going to be a little longer, verses 1 through 9. Zechariah 12, 1 through 9. So let's first go to Psalm chapter 2, verse 1, Dad.
Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain?
So this idea of the fact that the nations are raging and that they're plotting, that they're trying to somehow overthrow God's plan and His people and His nation, this idea that the nations rage, David saw this happening clear back in his day. And so the idea of the nations raging and scheming had been going on for a long, long time. So there's really shouldn't be any surprise when we come to Revelation 16 that the nations are still plotting and scheming. Now, we're going to see a little more detail about that years later in the prophecy of Zechariah. Zechariah 12, 1 through 9, Walker.
The oracle of the word of Yahweh concerning Israel. Thus declares Yahweh, who stretches out the heavens, lays the foundation of the earth, and forms the spirit of man within him. Behold, I'm going to make Jerusalem a cup that causes reeling to all peoples all around. Now the one in siege against Jerusalem will also be against Judah. But it will be in that day that I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples. All who heave it up will be severely injured, and all the nations of the earth will be gathered against it. In that day, declares Yahweh, I will strike every horse with bewilderment and his rider with madness. But I will open my eyes to watch over the house of Judah, while I strike every horse of the peoples with blindness. Then the clans of Judah will say in their hearts, a strong support for us are the inhabitants of Jerusalem, through Yahweh of hosts, their God. In that day I will make the clans of Judah like a fiery lather among pieces of wood, and a fiery torch among sheaves. And they will consume on the right hand and on the left all the surrounding peoples, while Jerusalem will again be inhabited in its own place in Jerusalem. Yahweh also will save the tents of Judah first, so that the glory of the house of David and the glory of the inhabitants of Jerusalem will not be magnified above Judah. In that day, Yahweh will defend the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and the one who stumbles among them in that day will be like David, and the house of David will be like God, like the angel of Yahweh before them. It will be in that day that I will seek to destroy all the nations that come against them.
Okay, so what we see here now, as David said years ago, the nations rage, they plot. Well, here we see there's going to come a day when all the nations scheme and plot against Jerusalem, and they assemble against it. And yet, are they going to succeed in destroying it? No. They're going to come against it, but everything to the right and to the left of Jerusalem is going to be destroyed, but the inhabitants of Jerusalem will be established. And not only that, verse 8, in that day, the Lord will defend the inhabitants of Jerusalem. The one who is feeble among them in that day shall be like David, and the house of David shall be like God. So, God is going to be there ruling like the house of David. And so we start to see Zechariah giving a little clarity to what this Armageddon event looks like. And then the fulfillment being worked out in the book of Revelation really is no surprise to those who have understood the Old Testament. It's really just explaining this is the order of things that will come and how these prophecies will be fulfilled. And so this idea of Armageddon, it really isn't so much of a battle as it's an organization against Jerusalem, and they do begin to lay their siege attack on Jerusalem. However, they're not going to be destroyed. God Himself will come and deliver them. So that is going to provoke this idea of this campaign against Armageddon. That's going to provoke then really what we're going to see as the return of Jesus Christ. So as they go through this period of tribulation, it sort of comes near the end. Daniel's going to say, not quite. There's still a few more days to go after this happens. But we're going to see this campaign of Armageddon launched, and that's going to provoke the return of Christ with all of the church age believers. And as Israel then cries out to God under this massive attack upon them, Jesus shows up. And of course, when He shows up, this is that moment that many of us have in our minds. This is the second coming. This is the advent of Christ. This is the Parousia when Jesus returns. And so the second coming of Christ really does become the culminating point of future prophecy. And it brings this siege, if you will, of Jerusalem to an end. We see that in Revelation 19:19. Somebody wants to just jump there and read that for us. Revelation 19:19, we see that it is the return of Christ that ends this campaign against Jerusalem from Armageddon. Revelation 19:19.
And I saw the beast, the king of the earth, and their armies gathered together to make war against him who sat on the horse and against his army.
Yep, so here you've got the moment. There's the beast and all the kings of the earth, and they're all there to make war against him. And then, verse 20. Then the beast was captured, and with him the false prophet who worked signs in his presence, by which he deceived those who received the mark of the beast and those who worshipped his image. These two were cast alive into the lake of fire burning with brimstone. And the rest were killed with the sword which proceeded from the mouth of him who sat on the horse, and all the birds were filled with their flesh. Jesus shows up, and it's over. There is no battle. There really is not even an engagement. There's this move towards Jerusalem, a cry out of the people to, Lord, deliver us, and the coming of Messiah on his horse with his hosts of armies behind him, and boom, the battle is over. If you can call it even a battle. The event is over. And it's swift, and it's powerful, and it's done. There's no fighting back against Christ. We could go over and read in Matthew chapter 24 and 25, and in your book, there is some descriptions here of this moment of the Parousia. But ultimately, the question asks us, how did Christ describe his own future coming? And if we go back and we look at those texts in Matthew, we see one, Christ describes his coming as literal, that he literally is going to return to the earth, that his return is visible. He's going to have a visible return. Why would it matter that Christ's return is a visible return? What difference does that make?
Well, especially for the people that don't believe that God is God, it gives them that visual, that tangible evidence.
Yep. Ray is not wrong. All the years that we've heard, well, if God is real, he's never shown himself to me. Well, you just saw it. You just saw it. His return is visible. And you can see it, and you can witness that Christ is physically present on the earth. It's also important for those of us who do want to teach the literal fulfillment of Scripture, because if one wants to say that the return of Jesus Christ is just a spiritual return, that Jesus just dwells in our hearts, he comes to the earth in every believer, and as we learn to love each other, Jesus is here. He's returned in the life of every Christian, and his dwelling and his kingdom reigns in our hearts. Well, but he did say that he would visibly return. And we don't see that visible presence of Jesus Christ if he's reigning in our hearts. And if he's ruling over a spiritual kingdom today, that doesn't fulfill the prophecy that Jesus himself spoke. He said, when I come, I will be seen. Then lastly, as we look at the New Testament, Matthew 24 and 25, he said that he would reign as king on the throne of David. He would reign as king on the throne of David. This is a fulfillment of Zechariah and many other Old Testament prophecies. But again, if Jesus is simply reigning in our heart, then we have to somehow imply that our heart is the throne of David. Is that where David dwelt? Is that where he ruled his kingdom, was from the heart? Not really. David's kingdom was pretty specifically in a central location. First, does anyone remember when David was anointed king of Judah, where was he ruling from? Hebron. Yep, he ruled from Hebron. And then later, as the kingdom united, all the tribes under David's headship, he went and he moved the capital to Jerusalem and ruled and reigned from Jerusalem. And so David didn't rule hearts. David ruled a kingdom from a throne, from a palace. And so will Christ. And so these things are just showing us that the second coming, then as he ends Armageddon, deals with that mass, that campaign against Jerusalem, he then will establish himself then to be king. But before he establishes himself as king, he'll return to the earth and he will remove the abomination of desolation. Anybody remember that back in Daniel? The abomination of desolation. What was that all about? Who can remind me what the abomination of desolation was? Unclean. Yep. The Antichrist himself goes into the temple, offers unclean sacrifices, and declares himself to be the one to be worshipped. And in that moment, Antichrist himself, seated in the temple, becomes the object of worship for the entire world. It becomes a global religion. And as Christ returns, he deals with the army, and then he purges and cleans the temple. Do kings rule from temples? No. This isn't establishing of a kingdom. This is a purifying of the people of Israel, and really purifying the world. We're going to remove this abomination of desolation. And so he's going to go in and he's going to deal with this Antichrist. We can look at different things here. The abomination of desolation goes back to Daniel 12. It's in your book there. So I'll just leave you guys to go back and look at that if you want to remember what that was about. But when we look at Revelation chapter 13, let's just jump over there for a second. Revelation 13, verse 14 and 15. We see here that this beast comes up in verse 11, and he exercises authority. And verse 13, Revelation 13:13, he performs great signs, so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast, who was wounded by the sword and lived. He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, and that image of the beast should both speak and cause many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. And he goes on to talk about how this becomes this bondage religion that Antichrist is going to establish. And so when Christ comes, he's going to purge that out. He's going to purge the temple and cleanse the temple and drive out this abomination of desolation. Then there's going to be the judgment of the Antichrist and the false prophet. As Antichrist and false prophet came, we read first off that in Revelation 19, we saw that the beast was captured, and with him the false prophet, who worked signs in his presence, by which he received those who received the mark of the beast. And do you remember where they were cast? This beast and this false prophet. They were cast into the lake of fire. Living. They were living and cast into the lake of fire. This really is the first, if we can say it, inhabitants of the eternal lake of fire. As we see this idea of this eternal lake of fire, this eternal place of complete torment, it is this that gets cast there first. As this battle has taken place, as the battle is finished with the Lord opening his mouth and destroying his enemies, he rounds up the beast and the false prophet, this Antichrist, and he casts them first into this lake of fire. Now, at the end, they are not going to be alone forever in this lake of fire. It will be the destination of many, but not yet. We're not there yet, but this judgment of the Antichrist and the false prophet occurs. So there's this purging of the temple. There's this taking the beast and the false prophet, Antichrist, and casting them into this lake of fire. And then Satan, does he get cast into the lake of fire? Not yet. What happens to Satan? He gets bound up and put in a pit. Okay, that's interesting. And as we look at sort of Satan's time during what we're going to call the millennial kingdom, we're going to see that in Revelation chapter 20. And in Revelation chapter 20, beginning in verse 7, now when the 1,000 years have expired, Satan will be released from his prison. And so this time of 1,000 years, Satan has been imprisoned. He's been bound up. Read that in the beginning of chapter 20. He's been bound up, he's been enchained, he's been put in a pit, and he's in some sort of a prison. Whereas the beast and Antichrist false prophet, they were cast into this lake of fire. But not Satan. He's been bound and he's been imprisoned for the 1,000 years. The word that's used there is that he is thrown into the abyss. Thrown into an abyss. You guys ever think of the word abyss? What comes to your mind? Dark, deep pit. Nothing. Yeah. Yeah, black holes. I think I got influenced by Hollywood, because when I think of an abyss, like I'm thinking like these deep underwater canyons, where the submarines go and then they like crush and they start buckling and then, we got to get out of here. Like I think of just these deep, dark, pressurized, isolated places. And that's where Satan's going. He's going to be cast into some sort of a deep, dark hole where he's not going to be seen or heard from for 1,000 years. And so Satan is imprisoned, and then there's this judgment of the Gentiles. For that, we're going to go to Joel chapter 3. So I need a volunteer for Joel 3, 1 through 3. Somebody would take that one for me. Joel 3, 1 through 3. Okay, Dad's got that one. And then Matthew chapter 25. We're all going to go there. So we'll have Dad read Joel while the rest of us go to Matthew 25.
For behold, in those days and at that time, when I restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem, I will gather all the nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat, and I will enter into judgment with them there, on behalf of my people and my heritage Israel, because they have scattered them among the nations, and have divided up my land, and have cast lots for my people, and traded a boy for a prostitute, and have sold a girl for wine and drug.
So, in this day, the Lord's going to return and he's going to gather all of the nations before himself for judgment. And so whoever's left on the earth, whatever's going on after this battle, God deals with the battle, but it's not everyone on the earth that goes to war at Armageddon. It's not every human soul that's left on the planet, but the kings are going to gather their armies they have and they're going to go make war. That'll get dealt with. Satan's dealt with. The false prophet and Antichrist, they're dealt with. Now we've got to deal with the rest of the people, the rest of the inhabitants of the planet Earth. And it says God is going to gather them up and he's going to bring the nations to himself for judgment. We see this in Matthew chapter 25. You guys just turned there. Let's look beginning in verse 34. Then the king will say to those on his right hand, "Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world." He goes on, you know this passage well. "I was hungry and you gave me food. I was naked and you clothed me." And verse 37, the righteous will say, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you?" And he said, "Well, when you did it to the least of these." Now, as we go down to verse 41, then he will say to those on the left hand, "Depart from me, you cursed, into everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry and you gave me no food. I was thirsty and you gave me no drink." And it goes on down and it says in verse 45, "Then he will answer them saying, Surely I say unto you, inasmuch as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. And these will go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous to everlasting life. And so there's this judgment in this moment where the nations are gathered, and some go on ahead with the Lord, some are going to be cast away from Him for all of eternity. And so there's this judgment of the gathering up of the Gentiles left on the earth, and there's also another resurrection that occurs. Now, the resurrection of the Old Testament saints, we don't need to get into that. Some say they'll be resurrected with the church because they had faith in God and then Christ had atoned for their sin, and they'll be raised with the church. Others would argue, and passages in the Old Testament that seem to indicate they're going to be resurrected just prior to the millennial kingdom, they have a pretty strong argument too. And to be quite honest with you, I'm going to just give you my theological opinion. I don't care. I really don't care when the Old Testament saints get resurrected, because they will. And they will forever be with the Lord. However, the timing of it, some would argue, happens now as Christ comes back to the earth. But what we do know is during this time at Christ's return that the martyred saints, those who died and were martyred during the Great Tribulation, they will be risen again. And Revelation talks about this as the second resurrection, the next resurrection of believers, of those who are going to be brought up because they persevered in their faith despite the hatred of Antichrist towards them and the beast and the false prophet. They were martyred for their faith, and they will at this time be resurrected. And so there'll be a resurrection of these tribulation believers, possibly Old Testament believers, and then there's a whole bunch of administrative stuff that happens. And for that, I challenge you to look at some of these scriptures that are in your book. We're not going to take the time to go through all of them, but there are geographical shifts that take place. Daniel, in his prophecy, he talks about, there's going to be this 1,260 days. Well, that's not the whole of the 3.5 years. It leaves lingering about 75 days. And so Daniel says then there's going to be this period of 45 days. And then there's going to be another period of 30 days. And so as this kingdom of Christ, as He's come back, and all of these things have happened, there's going to be some administrative stuff going on, where then the Lord will establish kings and governors over the earth. The nations will come and begin to pay tribute to Him. And really, to be honest with you, it seems like there's taxes in the kingdom. And Christ takes time to establish all of that. And then the kingdom, the 1,000 years, begins. And so it's not like we sometimes have in our mind that moment when Christ comes and He establishes His authority over the rebellious of the earth, and He saves Jerusalem and gathers the nations to Himself. That happens quickly. But this idea of the kingdom launching, it's more of a slow launch sometimes than we get in our mind. He will establish Himself after He purifies the temple, after He does certain things, after He brings the nations, separates the sheep and the goats, and then He will appoint leaders and rulers and send the nations back out to inhabit the earth, and then He will rule and reign for 1,000 years. So there's some great things in your book on that. If you have questions, hit me up anytime. We can look more at that. But I just wanted to kind of lay that out. And this here then is where our study concludes. So I do want to, when I get back from Congo then, I want to address why does it matter? And that's the title of this series, Why Dispensationalism Matters. And so I want to get practical. And as I come back and say, okay, well, why does it matter if there's a rapture? Why does it matter if we believe in a tribulation? Why does it matter what we believe about Christ's second coming? If He's coming physically to reign for 1,000 years, or if He's just reigning in our hearts? Why does it matter? As long as we believe Him and we're forgiven of our sin, who cares about this stuff? Well, I'm gonna talk about why today, for you and I, these things matter. And ultimately, I had a professor once in one of my classes, and he said the thing that we need to understand is that our eschatology, our belief on the things that are yet to come, it will drive the bus of our soteriology. Soteriology is the doctrine of salvation. Who are we seeking to reach that are lost? Who are the lost? What is the purpose of the church? To what extent do we go to share Jesus Christ with the lost? We're doing that until when? Until how long are we reaching the lost? What does it mean to reach the lost? What does it mean for people to be saved? And I'll show you. Remember when we started this 18 years ago, I wrote up on the whiteboard, there's Reformed theology, and there's liberation theology, and there's kingdom theology. Each of those thinks, as they develop their doctrine of Scripture, they come to the conclusion then, based on what we believe, what is the church supposed to be doing now? And based on what we believe. Why dispensationalism matters? Because what we believe about Israel and the church, what we believe about the second coming, what we believe about the kingdom, as we begin to think through those things, it's going to define what are we doing now to save those who are lost. Because our answer to that question is not going to be anywhere near the answer to that question of those coming from a liberation theology perspective. And it's not really even very similar to Reformed theology. They end at very different conclusions as to why we are here, what we're supposed to be doing, who we're supposed to be reaching, and what salvation to the lost looks like. What does it mean that we proclaim salvation to the lost? So I'll get more into that. But as I take off, and I'll be back in a couple of weeks. You guys got a great line of speakers while I'm gone. Next week, Ben Sparks is going to hit you with a double barrel. He's bringing all his guns. So he's got a great lesson prepared. Pastor Cleve and Gary are going to split a lesson on the Psalms. It's going to be really exciting. And then, I'm trying to get somebody to come that's never spoken to you before. I'm working on him. So pray that I'll win. So if I don't, we have a backup plan. But we're trying to line up a great speaker for that last week just before I get back. And I'll give you a hint. His initials are Caleb Spall. So encourage him. He's got a great lesson prepared. Encourage him to share that lesson. Yeah. So any questions before we end this and come then to today, why it matters? Yep.
And kind of show the weaknesses of dispensationalism.
Yep.
That they have. Is that going to be part
That's part of it.
Okay.
Yep. Absolutely. So as we look at those other ones and the conclusions they come to, I'll highlight the differences, and then I'm going to end this series with, okay, we've been through this, but we've got some things that are hard to reconcile, and let's just be honest with it. And so we'll talk through those things, and I don't have answers to all of them because some of them are hard to think through and talk through. And so yeah, we'll have a probably 2 or 3 weeks on some of the challenges in dispensationalism. And the fact that we're not united and why we're not united. You know, dispensationalists don't agree. So, shocker. Reformed theologians don't agree either, but don't tell them I said that. All right. Okay, if you got your prayer sheet tonight, I want to just hit a couple highlights for you. Down here on Thanksgiving and gratefulness, Mary Rucker is home. She ended up not having a surgery to remove the blood clots. I stopped by and I prayed with her. They were wheeling her out to do surgery. And then Gary Rucker called me later that night and said they got her up to the operating room. They were re-looking over everything, and they felt the risk was not worth the possible reward. So they canceled the surgery, put her on some medication that is supposed to be breaking down those blood clots. So she is home, but she still is in some pain and discomfort as they've got her on those medications. So keep that as a prayer request. But Mary is home, and she is recovering and doing a little bit better. Coming on down the list, I showed you Bibles are purchased for Congo. Excited about that. The churches are really excited. We'll look forward to sending you guys some pictures of those getting then into the hands some of the churches and some of the students at the Bible Institute. Coming on down the list, I want to just hit some of these things. Some of our sister churches over at New Hope Baptist Church. Over the last couple of years, have any of you gotten a chance to meet Pastor Luke? He's younger. Yeah, Walker's met him. Yep, a few of you have met him. So he has been praying about the Lord's long-term ministry and where he wanted him, and he was invited by a church in Kansas to go over and join them as an associate pastor with the goal of replacing the senior pastor in the next couple years. He has family connections back there, and so he'll be moving in July to head back to Kansas and take a ministry there. At the same time, Caleb, who's been doing his internship there, he's the son of our camp director, Kyle. Caleb's finishing up his internship and is seeking what the Lord has for his career and where he's going to be going from there. Not feeling called to stay on staff at New Hope, thinks God has something else for him. And so they're going to lose two of their team in a matter of weeks through the summer. And so Pastor Daniel said, we're going to be fine and people are going to step up and serve, but we are going to miss them, and just pray that the Lord would help us as a church to just, grow up new leadership, people who will step up and serve in some of those areas. So be praying for those transitions and for the church as they're working through that. On our prayer requests, Walker's on a program to get his teeth knocked out. He had one wisdom tooth removed today, and then they're going to just keep taking one out at a time over the next couple of months, it sounds like. I guess they used to just pull them all, but they don't want to do that anymore. So they want to just take them one at a time. So pray as he's healing from this one and gets the excitement of going through it 3 more times. And then he won't be wise anymore. So be praying for Walker while he's working through that. Noah and I were supposed to be leaving Tuesday. Now it will just be me. But continue to pray for that. In case you've been watching the news, travel's getting a little weird. We will be monitoring that. And if it's getting too weird, I won't make this trip. Although I would really like to, because there's some important things that are going on there. But if it's not time, it's not time. So just be praying for the situation there. Colette Duffy, Pastor Will's wife over in Ontario, she had her gallbladder removed on yesterday. It was an outpatient surgery. She's home. She's recovering well, but continue to pray for her recovery. The Idaho National Guard was deployed this weekend. Many of Ray's friends, people that he's known for a long time, including my brother-in-law, David Thomas, was deployed. So keep them in your prayers as they are off to an undisclosed location in a land far away, but I don't think you have to guess very hard. Gospel follow-up conversations from the weekend. Had some great connections in the community over the weekend through the event here at the church. Follow-up conversations after Sunday. We had a lot of visitors. So just pray that the Spirit continues to work in those. Any other praises, prayer requests? Didn't get on the list. Sarah?
One of my employees she was brought here by her parents from Mexico.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And she is currently back in Mexico.
Okay.